On the night the barn caught fire, I stood in the pasture with a letter in my pocket and ash on my tongue, praying the wheels I heard in the dark were his. If Noel chose me, we would change both our lives. If he didn't, I'd disappear for good. I didn't go to Lancaster County to fall in love with an Amish man. I went because a stroke had tilted a kind old farmer's smile and stiffened his left side, and because I knew how to coax strength back into hands and legs that threatened to forget their purpose. It was an honest reason and a good one, but the truth is, I had been searching for quiet. I'd been listening for a voice I didn't know I was missing until I heard Noel's. His grandfather was my patient. The day I met Noel, it was still cool enough for breath to show at dawn, and the fields were folded in a pale fog that rose like prayer. I drove down a lane edged with fence posts and goldenrod, the wood darkened by dew. A black buggy stood by the barn doors, its lanterns unlit. Chickens scratched under the hedge. A patchwork of quilts hung to air on a line, bright flags against the slow-rising light. Noel came from the barn with a pail in one hand and an apple in the other. He was tall, his shoulders strong beneath a plain blue shirt, his hat tipped back a little, as if to let the morning in. He had the easy balance of someone who'd grown into his chores until they were part of him, who could shoulder a weight without complaint. He said good morning in a voice like a quiet creek, clear, patient, offering more if I stood still long enough to listen. "I'm Andrew," I said, holding out my hand. "From the therapy clinic." He took it with a careful grip. His palm was warm and dry, a little rough, and I knew, as I often know, whether a person will fight for their strength. You learn through years of kneading into people's lives, lifting their limbs, coaxing their steps where the grit lives. But whatever I saw in Noel then, it wasn't only grit. It was something older than resolve. It was steadiness. It was the way some trees seem to say yes to wind and still remain trees. "Grandpop's inside," he said. "We've the lounge chair set by the window. He likes the light." "We'll need it," I said, and I followed him into a kitchen that smelled of coffee and wood smoke and the sweet iron scent that comes off a clean barn. A Bible sat open on the table. A quilt lay folded on a chair, like a friend waiting to visit. And in the chair by the window, the old man lifted his good hand toward me and grinned, with half of his mouth and the whole of his spirit. Noel stepped back, but not far, and as I worked, lifting the old man's foot to a stool, showing him how to press into my hand, to trust the floor again, to trust himself, I felt Noel's gaze steady on us, the way sun steadies on a fence line all day. He didn't hover. He watched like a student and like a grandson. He asked good questions in his soft voice and scratched notes on scraps of paper he kept folded in his pocket. When I set the old man to squeezing a rolled towel, Noel watched every curl of his fingers, watched for effort, the set of the jaw, watched like someone who would remember and use it later. I had the sudden certain thought that if I were the one in the chair years from now, and if Noel were the one in the room, I would trust him without asking for a reason why. I had been in that county for a week, sleeping in a small room over Etta May's kitchen where the scent of cinnamon and the murmur of a radio kept the evening's company. Etta May had lived enough years to know that people liked to say their worries out loud. She gave me tea in a chipped blue cup, and I gave her my long pauses. "You tell me when to mind my business." "Honey," she said, and then she minded it anyway. Gentle as a cat, I told her after that first session, "There's a man there, Noel. He watches like he's learning how to hold the whole barn in his hands." "Well," she said, smiling around the rim of her cup, "some folks are born foremen with kindness, and some folks are just handsome and make you forget your name. You'll figure out which is which." I didn't tell her how my chest had felt when Noel turned his head and met my eye while he steadied his grandfather's elbow on the stairs. It wasn't a feeling I trusted yet. It was warm, clean air after a long stretch underground. It was the relief of one easy breath and the fear of wanting two. After therapy that first day, Noel led me out to the porch. He picked up a mason jar, unscrewed the lid, and handed me a wedge of bread thick sliced and dipped in apple butter. "From my mother," he said, "for your kindness." "My kindness is billable," I said, and then knowing it came out wrong, I added, "but I appreciate it." "I do," he smiled at the jar. I told Grandpop I wouldn't let you leave on an empty stomach. He said, I don't want him to leave at all. He's good. I felt a flush of pride and a warning to myself not to let pride become personal. It was early days. It was always early days, until a leg lifted and stayed lifted, a hand grasped and didn't fall open, until a stair was climbed with only the railing and breath as help. But I let myself stand on the porch and eat that apple butter bread under the shade of the porch roof as if it were a sacrament. Noel leaned against the post and bit into his apple and told me about the mare expecting a foal in 2 months. She's stubborn, he said. Likes the left side of the pasture, even if the shade's better on the right. Some of us are particular, I said, and he laughed. And it was a laugh you wanted to hear several times a day, just to be better. The days made their soft ladder, one step laid on the next. I came every morning, sometimes again in the late afternoon. There's a rhythm to healing that is both kind and strict. You can't rush a tendon any more than you can rush a sunrise. You can call your patient brave and they'll be brave, but the body is honest and needs time, and time attends to those who show up. Noel showed up. He asked about angles, about repetition, about rest. He learned where to place his hands, so his grandfather felt help, not pity. He held the towel while his grandfather turned it. He stood behind him on the stairs and did not flinch when the weight leaned back. He was steady as fence posts, hammered deep and squared true. I learned other things about him in pieces, bits handed to me the way he handed me that first slice of apple butter bread. He'd been born on that farm. He'd learned to milk before he learned to fix a button without looking. He built furniture with his father in winter when the days were short and his hands could make a chair that spoke without making any words. On Sundays, they met at a neighboring home to sing. He didn't drink coffee, but he liked strong tea with a little honey. He was 26 and not yet baptized, which meant he was still standing on a threshold. The rest of the world likes to pretend is a thin line. When it's really a wide field of grass, you can cross at your own speed. On the third Tuesday, the day warmed like a hand on your shoulder. We had carried his grandfather's chair into the yard, and I had him stepping side to side, lifting his feet over a low board, practicing for the uneven grass in the field. Noel watched for the little wiggles, for the turn of the ankle that tells you the brain is thinking too hard. He offered his hand when his grandfather hesitated, and his grandfather took it and he whispered, "Gut," which I had learned to recognize in their Pennsylvania Dutch even within a few days. Good. I'd brought a book of photographs in my bag. I've learned over the years that lines and shapes can coax a hand open when a person tires of being told to open it. I laid the book on the arm of the chair. His grandfather turned the pages with his good hand and asked me about the mountains he saw there. Noel leaned in to see what his grandfather saw, and his shoulder was close enough that I could feel the day's warmth on it. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't planned. It was the world arranging itself so that certain truths, the shape of Noel's profile, the way his lashes lifted when he studied something new, the patience he practiced like prayer, were undeniable. When I left that day, Noel walked me to my car. He said, "The pictures are kind, as if kindness belonged to things the way it belongs to people. They're not selling anything." "I think they tried," I said, "and then gave up. That's how they won me over." He nodded. He looked toward the lane, toward where the hedgerow made a door to the road. Then he looked back and said, "You're kinder than you let on." "I'm kinder when apple butter's involved," I said, which made him laugh again, and I carried his laughter with me all the way back to Etta May's. That night, the radio hummed along to an old song, and Etta May set a pie to cool on the sill. "You look like you saw something worth seeing," she said. "I think I did," I said. Then I told her, careful with my words, careful even with my silence. In another life, I might have said everything without a thought. In this life, with what I knew about men like Noel and the people who love them, I knew that what you say can be heavy in someone else's hands. She folded her dish towel. "Sometimes the most important part is not naming a thing too soon," she said. "Let it prove itself first. Let it nest where it wants. I fell in love with an Amish man, I said, half to see how it sounded, half like a dare to myself. The words were too big for the room, and too true to take back. I shook my head. I don't know if those two secrets can sit at the same table. Etta May looked at me the way she looked at her bread when she tested it with a knuckle. She didn't scold me for dreaming. She didn't pull me down to earth as if earth were safer for everyone. There is room at this world's table you haven't seen yet, she said. Even for a love that has to eat in the kitchen sometimes. Just be gentle, be honest. And remember, we don't measure our courage by how loud our voice is, but by how we carry our silence. I went to sleep to the sound of crickets and far-off wheels on gravel, and woke with steady knowledge. Whatever this was, it had arrived like weather. Not because I had summoned it, not because I had earned it, but because it was time. There are things I will not describe. Because part of loving Noel was respecting the ground he walked on, and the path his people had worn with their feet. But I will tell you this, what happened between us began with care. It began with his hand on his grandfather's shoulder. It began with my own hands learning the edges of my want, to hold it without crushing it. It began with a letter I wrote and didn't send. We didn't have a phone between us, not one that was his to carry, and I would not ask him to break what he hadn't chosen to break himself. So I wrote a letter and sealed it, and it sat in the drawer with my socks for days, thin as a leaf, heavy as a stone. I wrote the way a man builds a chair knowing someone's weight will rest in it, careful with the joints, honest about the grain. I wrote that I liked the way he stood back to see the whole of something before he touched it. I wrote that when the light came through the barn slats and watered the air, I wanted him to be the one beside me, naming the color. I wrote that I would never ask him to be less than he was, to make himself more like me. I didn't send it, because timing is the first courtesy. Instead, I kept showing up. In late May, rain came down in sheets, and then in a fine mist that hung like lace between the trees. On a day like that, you learn which roofs are winter roofs and which are not. The buggy road turned to ribbon. In the afternoon, after the exercises, Noel's grandfather dozed, and Noel and I stood on the porch, watching the grey. The barn was close enough that the rain on its metal roof sounded like applause. "It is a good sound," Noel said. "It is." I had to be careful how close I stood to him. I had to be careful what I said that meant more than it meant. He leaned on the post, the same way as the first day, and said, "Do you ever wish for a simple life you don't have to explain?" I studied the rain, so my answer would come from a steady place. "I wish for an honest life. Sometimes simple isn't honest," he nodded. "Yeah." He didn't need to tell me what that sound meant. He was saying yes to me and to his own thoughts at the same time. It was then I decided to put the letter not in the mail, but in a place that belonged to us. There's a small creek that runs behind their pasture, a place where the fence dips and the stones are flat. On dry days, you can sit without damp rising up through your jeans, and on wet days the water thickens and speaks. I walked there at dusk after my last session and tucked the letter under a flat rock that looked like a book left open. It was foolish. It was hopeful. You can argue those are the same thing. And then I waited. 3 days later, when I walked with Noel to the lane after the early session, he reached into his pocket and handed me a folded piece of paper without words. I didn't open it then. We both knew better than that. He was quiet on the porch, and I was quiet too, and the quiet was not empty. I read his letter in my car. His handwriting was tidy, the way he kept his tools. The first sentence was a whole sentence in his Pennsylvania Dutch that I did not know, and then in English beneath it, as if he had said it twice to be sure I would understand. "I see you." There were more words. There was a sentence about the way I never pressed his grandfather past the point where effort turns to stubbornness. There was a line about the color of the world in morning when we stood at the barn door. At the bottom, in small letters, there was this: "I have never said this to anyone before. I am not made to marry a woman. I don't know what I am made for, but I think it might be the truth." I folded my hands on the steering wheel and breathed until I could trust my breath. I wrote back as carefully, and we set a rhythm we could live with. A letter tucked under a rock. A look held one heartbeat too long, and then released like a bird we both wanted to see fly. Words that threaded their way into our days and made space for the ones we did not speak aloud. It was a good summer. I don't mean easy. Good and easy are cousins who seldom visit at the same time. There was loss. My father called one night, his voice a dull bell. He was in Ohio, and he had been the sort of man who could lift a piano with a friend and a good strap, but had never learned to ask for help in a soft voice. He said his chest felt like the seat of a car left too long in the sun. He was short of breath. He was afraid. I drove to him in a hurry, the road unspooling under me like a promise, and was there when his heart loosed its grip finally and lay down to rest. Grief makes you empty and also clearer. It takes things out of your hands and then shows you what's still there. When I returned to Lancaster after the funeral, the afternoon light was lime in the trees, and Noel was on the porch step, hat in his hands, waiting. He stood when my car pulled in, and he didn't say he was sorry like we say when we don't know how else to open the door. He said, "Sit," and sat beside me on the top step. The porch boards were warm. He set his hat beside him and folded his hands, and did not look at me, so I did not have to hold my face steady. A bird called, and the sound was a little like a question. If I had not known how to cry, I would have learned then. When I was ready, Noel said, "Tell me something about him," and I did. I told him about my father's way of fixing what broke without making speeches. I told him about the day he showed me how to measure twice and cut once, and then, when I cut wrong anyway, how he just handed me another board and did not scold me because he knew I was already carrying that scold. Noel said, "That was a kind man," and I nodded because there is relief in having your people recognized. After that, summer tightened into its strength. We were good therapists together. We were careful men together. We did not meet in the nights the way stories want you to believe lovers meet. We did not take or break. We made, we chose. We let the creek take our letters and keep our secrets. A woman from down the road saw us once, standing by the fence, looking out at the corn that was almost taller than I am. She waved. Her husband was with her. He touched the brim of his hat. Later that week, the bishop came by the house during one of our sessions. He had eyes like the sky when a storm is still 3 fields away. He was kind to me in the way of men who are trying to be kind to everyone. He stayed for coffee and asked about the exercises and watched Noel's grandfather lift his knees and step over the board and back. He said the word gut, and it fit. But even when kindness is real, there can be worry braided through it, and I understood. Noel understood. You don't have to name attention to feel it pull. There was a day I thought we were found out. It was small and quiet, and most of life-changing things are. Noel's cousin, Jacob, is younger by 5 years and loud with the kind of loud that would be quiet if you asked it to in the right way. He came up the lane in a hurry, a strip of paper in his hand. I was packing my bag on the porch. He looked at me and then away like he'd walked in on someone in prayer. I knew the paper. It was my handwriting, one of the early letters. It must have slipped or been carried by a curious breeze out from under the rock. The world's timing is lovely until it isn't. Noel took it from him before he could speak. He slipped it into his pocket and put a hand on Jacob's shoulder with a brother's ease. They spoke in Pennsylvania Dutch, fast like water skimming over stones. Jacob's face shifted from surprise to worry to something like relief. He looked at me again, and then at the ground like he was asking forgiveness. He said, "I won't say," in English, and ran back down the lane so his feet would outrun his fear. Noel stood with his back to the yard and his front to the open, because sometimes to hide what matters, you turn toward danger and pretend you do not care. He did not look at me, but he said, "It's not a sin to care for someone. But to keep a thing from the ones who expect your truth is a weight. I don't want to hurt you," I said. "I know," he said, and because he said it like that, I believed him, and because I believed him, I also believed there was a part of this neither of us could hold up on our own. A week later, the barn caught fire. There are reasons barns burn: lightning, a spark, heat on hay that was baled damp. The night it happened, the air was thick and reluctant to move. The sky's belly held its breath. I was at Etta May's kitchen table, letter in my pocket, writing Noel a note that had too much of me in it. I heard the siren of the volunteer fire company and didn't need a clock to know the time. You can hear a different kind of urgency in a siren that crosses open fields. A minute later, the phone on the wall rang. Etta May answered. Her eyes found me like the way a dog finds the door before you knock. Go, she said. By the time I reached the lane, a low orange had bloomed behind the barn like a cruel sunrise. Smoke was a blanket thrown over the stars. Men ran with buckets because you do what you can even when trucks with their teeth of water are on their way. Noel's father stood at the corner calling, and the animals were loud with the kind of fear you can smell. Noel met me at the fence, his face blackened with soot, his eyes white and bright like the moon. The mayor won't come, he said, and we went together without the need to say whose job it was to be brave first. Heat can be a wall. We pushed into it. I told myself that the only life that matters to save is the one you can reach. We reached for halters with hands that did not feel like my hands anymore. We pulled, soot in our mouths, breath shredded. You don't think about the fire. You think about the next step to the yard. When I looked up, Noel was beside me, one hand on a horse that did not trust what she could not see behind her, one eye on the door. We pulled her into the night, where air was still a thing you could drink. The sound of relief in an animal is not the sound humans make. It is older and closer to truth. We threw water on sparks that leaped like thieves. Somewhere in the smoke and noise, I felt the center of me begin to make a choice. It was like a door that had looked like a wall for years suddenly swung open. Someone yelled my name. I turned and saw Noel's grandfather on the grass, where they had carried him out. He lay on a blanket with his chest heaving. Noel's mother knelt beside him, her hands on his shoulders. She looked at me the way a person looks at a doctor she recognizes from another life. I dropped the bucket and went to them. I counted breaths. I steadied his feet and his heart with my voice, because sometimes the voice is the only thing that will hold. Here, I said. With me, in, out. The old man's eyes were on me like he was pinning me to this world. He breathed. He kept breathing. A great beam hissed and fell, and we all flinched for the same reason. When the trucks came, men who had known each other since their knees were dirty worked alongside men in reflective coats who had been trained to rush in when every instinct says to run. The water's roar changed the heart of the fire, and then the fire changed the water in return. It took the barn. There was no saving its bones, but the house stood and the fence stood, and the people who loved those things stood too after. When the worst was over and dawn had softened every edge that wasn't burned, I remembered the letter in my pocket like a brand against my thigh. I stood in the pasture with ash on my tongue and fear like a new muscle working in my chest. A buggy came fast down the lane, light still on it though morning had begun. I couldn't see the driver, but I knew. Of all the things I knew then, I knew this. If Noel chose me, we would change more than just our lives. If he didn't, I owed him the courtesy of my sudden absence. Etta May would help me pack. I would leave without making noise. He stepped down from the buggy, ash in his hair, his shirt wet where he had been generous with his sweat. He didn't walk to me. He ran because the window for choosing is small. He stopped 2 feet from me because there were eyes on us even then. He reached into his pocket and pressed something into my palm. It was a small wooden bird, sanded smooth. There was writing on its belly, a simple line with the patience of a hand that had chosen each letter. I looked. It said, "Stay." It did not make anything easy. It did not untangle the knots. But it was a choice we held up together like a roof beam you don't know yet if you can lift. That day and the days after, the community did what communities do. They gathered, they fed. They came with hammers and nails and the long teaching of hands that believe in work. I've been to a lot of events called gatherings, and I have never seen one like a barn raising. It is practical love. It is grief turned to motion. It is sorrow that refuses to freeze. Noel stood with his father, measuring, setting, checking plumb, his eyes red where smoke had kissed them. I held boards and fetched what was needed. The Englisher, who kept his mouth respectful and his pace steady. The bishop clapped Noel's shoulder, and once he nodded to me. It was not approval. It was not a blessing. It was something like acknowledgement, and I took it the way men take small mercies, with gratitude and a promise to be worthy of more. In the evenings, when the hammers went quiet, Noel's family spread food on tables set on sawhorses, bread and jars of pickled things, and ham carved thin and thick. People ate and spoke in voices that were both tired and satisfied, the way you're allowed to be when you gave your day away to someone else. I didn't linger. I did not want to be a question any longer than I already was. But Noel caught my sleeve as I walked past and said, "Come," and led me to the fence line. The creek sang over its stones like a choir, humming between songs. We stood there with the barn half-born behind us. "I don't know where this goes," he said. "I don't know how much of me I can ask my family to carry. I don't know how much of them I can ask you to carry. I don't want you to be alone," I said. "I don't want you to be shamed," he said back, looking past me as if the right words were written on the air across the field. "But I also don't want to lie. To you, to them, to me." "Then we don't lie," I said, and he made a small sound that might have been yes. The word stands the same in any language when it is used carefully. It wasn't just the bishop I worried about. It was Noel and his own promises, the ones he had not made yet but felt coming like weather. He was not baptized. That meant if he chose to step away, he would not be shunned in the same way as someone who vows and then breaks. It also meant he had not made his vows, and vows like theirs hold a roof over more than one house. I was outside that roof. I had a dad-shaped hole in me and a mother's laugh that visited in my memory like a wind chime in summer. I had a job that let me help people stand, but it did not tell me how to stand myself in a place where my presence was both help and trouble. One night in late summer, a boy went missing. He was 8, a cousin of Noel's, quick as a wren and twice as curious. He had followed the idea he had that frogs would be somewhere they were not. When they realized he was not under any of the roofs he should have been, the call went out. Lanterns and flashlights, men with their long strides and women with their precise, strong steps, fanning into the fields. I walked beside Noel with the rhythm of people who have searched before. The creek grew loud as more of us stood near it, calling the boy's name into the dark and answering ourselves with the word "here" when we heard someone else's voice. Before the fear did what fear does, tightened its ribs around your heart, Noel stopped and listened. It's a thing he does that still undoes me. He makes room for the small voices when the world is a roar. He tilted his head toward the stand of willows, and then he went that way quick, and I went with him, and then we all went because we trusted him. The boy was there, shoes muddy, pants soaked, crying because the frogs didn't answer when he told them they were his. When they brought the boy back, Noel's mother took his face in both her hands and called him by the kind of name only family uses. The one that has every good piece of you tucked into it. She kissed his forehead, and then she let him cry into her skirt, while she laughed with relief that sounded like grief doing its best to be joy. The bishop put his hand on Noel's neck and squeezed. I could have cried myself then, for love of that simple touch. It means something when the man who worries about you also trusts you to lead. We survived the summer together. We did not rush a single thing we could afford to leave steady. Noel's grandfather walked to the mailbox by himself once, and then again the next day. And the morning after that, he went partway to the barn, before Noel's father caught him and walked back to the house with him in that slow, companionable way men have when they are letting each other pretend they don't need help. We got caught exactly once, not by a person, by a moment. It was the first time Noel kissed me. If I write it, I have to write it as it was. Brief, careful, not a thing taken, not a thing stolen. We were standing in the new barn, late in the day. The rafters were high and smelled of fresh wood that had yet to be introduced to winter. The distance between us was busy with unsaid things. Noel had a plane in his hand and had been smoothing the edge of a beam until it lay true with the wall. He set it down. The light slid through the slats and made the dust in the air visible like stars. He took one step toward me and then another. We are measured men. We count steps. He put his hand to my arm, not to own me, but to steady himself. He lifted his face and found mine, and there in the barn, that was too new to know it was a home yet, his mouth met mine, and the whole world was quiet, as if we had told it to hush. We parted because people do not live on one breath. He looked at me, as if to say that if we were not careful, we would be careless, and neither of us wanted that. "Thank you," he said, which might sound odd, if you have not waited a long time for a thing. To me it was perfect. Gratitude makes the next choice better. In September, the corn came down, and the sky grew the kind of blue you only see when summer has set aside some of its own heat to let color happen. Noel and I sat by the creek with our boots off and our letters in our hands and decided to stop writing to the rock. It had been our third person, our go-between. We were ready for our words to stand without hiding. He went to his father in the afternoon and told him. Not a full telling. That would have been too sharp a knife. He said the truth you can hold without cutting everyone in the room. He said he was not made to marry the girl everyone thought he'd marry. He said he had a friend he cared for, a friend who was kind, a friend who respected their ways and would not ask to be a storm in a quiet place. His father loved him the way fathers who know hard work love their sons, a love made of praise and expectation and handshakes that mean everything. He looked at Noel a long time and said, "We've raised you to listen for the Lord. If he says go this way, you must also know it will cost you something. To stay will cost you something too." There were tears, but they did not drown the moment. His father's kindness didn't change the whole weather, but it kept some rain off us that day. The bishop came again the next week. He took a chair at the kitchen table and set his hat beside him. Noel's mother poured coffee. I kept to the porch because a respectful distance is all some situations will allow. Through the screen, I heard their voices rise and fall like a hymn sung without a leader. I caught pieces, not because I listened, but because words carry. Words like truth, words like community, words like honest and choosing. I stood with my hands on the railing and prayed in my quiet way, which has never been about asking for things as much as it has been about reminding myself to be grateful for whatever is given. They came out to the porch together. The bishop put his hands on the back of the chair and met my eyes. He hadn't done that before, not fully. He said, "You are not the first Englisher to be kind to us. Thank you for that kindness. The Lord sees all of us. That is both comfort and caution." He put his hat on and went down the steps, without telling me I was a mistake, but without blessing me either. I breathed anyway. I want to tell you that after that, the way was smooth. It wasn't. We stumbled. We pulled each other up with the same blend of mercy and impatience you need to teach a leg to walk again. Noel had days where he looked at his mother's hands kneading bread and could not bear the thought of breaking her heart with a choice that would take him too far to bring his own fresh-baked news to her door. I had days where I thought I could not bear to be asked to be patient one more day, where I wanted to be 20 again, careless as a brook. We didn't fight, because fighting is only useful when there's something to win. We talked, we sat. We put our feet in the creek and let the cold bite tell us we were alive. When autumn fell deep and the trees grew spectacular with their final speeches, Noel told me he would not be baptized. It was the least dramatic sentence he had ever spoken, which made it the most true. He said, "I cannot promise what I cannot keep. If I vow, I must be the vow. I can't be the vow they expect of me. But I can be a man who honors what those vows have given me." We stood in his pasture with the new barn steady behind us and his father in the doorway, one hand on the latch. Noel knew that was a door that would sometimes be closed to him. He knew also that doors do not lock permanently when love has a key, even if that key is only used in secret for a while. I told him I would stay. Not because I hoped to claim him faster by holding my ground, but because running when you are afraid does not make the fear respect you. Etta May's kitchen became our embassy. She set 2 plates now for dinner more often than she set 1. She fussed because it made her happy. She prayed over us not loudly, and not with words I could hear, but with the certainty of a woman who has seen things that didn't make sense by daylight still work out by dusk. Noel found work in an English shop that made furniture the old way, but took money the modern way. The owner knew what he was worth and promised to keep his name off paperwork until Noel knew who he wanted to be in the world. It was a grace I did not expect and one I won't forget. When Noel planed a piece of oak, the curls fell to the floor like long sentences we would never need to say again because the wood had said them for us. We built a little life on the edge of things at first. I kept my job, and my patients still called me Mr. Andrew like I was someone reliable. Noel paid cash for groceries and still took off his hat to pray before meals. We went to a church that sang old songs softly and did not stare at us when we sat in the back pew. On Sunday afternoons, if the weather was good, we drove the back roads with the windows down. If the weather was not good, we read. I read the book of photographs aloud, naming each mountain like the world was new and needed to be introduced. He taught me how to see where wood wanted to split and where it wanted to hold. We learned a new kind of silence together, the comfortable kind that comes when two people have made all the choices they can for the day and are content to let the evening make its own. It wasn't simple. The goodbyes weren't clean. Noel's mother came by once with a pie, her eyes bright and rimmed with the red that follows tears. She put it on the porch and said, "For you." And for a moment her hand touched Noel's sleeve, and I saw the love in that touch like a candle in a window. His father came months later. He stood on the porch and did not come in. He looked at Noel the way men look at the fields they planted long ago, proud, a little sad, knowing you cannot force everything to grow the way you planned. He shook Noel's hand and squeezed my shoulder and said, "The Lord watch between me and thee," the old words people use when they can't say everything. Sometimes a buggy would pass the house. Sometimes it didn't slow. Sometimes it did. We learned to take both as signs of life, trying to figure out how to love us. Sometimes we looked back with as much tenderness as we could pour through a window in a glance. Sometimes we shut the blinds and cooked dinner and ate it at the table Etta May insisted we take when she moved in with her sister, and we told each other the day's small stories, which is how love occupies itself between big noises. We did not hide who we were from each other, which is a bigger thing than not hiding who you are to the world. In the mornings, Noel would wake before me and put on coffee for me and kettle for himself, and the sound of water heating was to me what hymns are to him. He would read, and sometimes I would read over his shoulder, and the light would come through the window and lay across him like a promise. In the evenings I would sit on the porch and watch the road, and sometimes his parents' buggy would appear slowly, and sometimes it wouldn't. And I learned not to measure grace only by visits. Grandpop visited once, tucked between Noel's parents on the buggy seat, his hands folded in his lap like he was holding a story. He moved slowly, but his steps had intention in them. He sat in the chair by our window and looked at the field beyond it and said, "Gut," the word that had marked so many small victories. He took my hand and called me by my name, and for the first time he said it like it belonged to his family too. All of it took time. Love never outpaces the truth without regret. We made a home that could host both. We bought a second-hand dining table, and Noel sanded it down until it was pale and clean, and then rubbed it with oil until it glowed like it remembered it had been a living thing. We set plates on it that didn't match at first, and then slowly they did, because gentle lives find their own symmetry. We hung quilts, not for decoration, but because warmth is an art where he comes from. I brought my father's measuring tape. Noel brought his plane. The first winter, the wind pressed its hand against the house and checked our work. We held. I'm telling you all of this in a steady voice, like someone older than his years, because life asked me to be steady around Noel, and because the edges of happiness sometimes need a frame. But if I can let my voice shake for a moment, let me say this: I had not expected at my age, after losses and long quiet, to find a love that didn't ask me to choose between being who I am and being seen the way I want to be seen. Noel gave me that, I hope I gave him the same. The new barn smells now of animals and hay and work. It is what a barn should be, not an altar, but a place where lives pass through day after day and mark it with usefulness and care. On its beam, high up where only careful eyes will find it, Noel carved a small bird with its wings tucked. If you know where to look, you can see it with the morning light slanting just so. People think art must always be grand to be true. I have learned that the little things, the bird hidden where only a handful of people will ever look, are where life hides the proof that it meant to be beautiful all along. Sometimes we go to community singings, the ones where the English are welcome if we are polite, and we sit in the back row. Noel sings low, and the room vibrates with the sound of many lives lining up their breath in the same direction. It is not mine to translate what those songs say. I'm there for the way his hand finds my knee under the table for a moment, when a line strikes him just so. He will never raise his voice over anyone else's, but I know when he is singing for me too. We drive sometimes to the creek where the letters used to live and sit on the bank. The rock is still there, the water still tells the truth. We don't leave paper under it anymore. We leave the day's worries and pick up small stones to keep in our pockets, to run our fingers over when we need to remember the smoothness that comes from weathering. We have not solved anything for anyone else. There are young men who will not choose what Noel chose, and I will not tell them they are wrong. There are families who will shut their doors harder than Noel's did, and I cannot open those doors for them. We made a path where there hadn't been one. That is our work. We keep it swept. We invite careful feet to try it. We set out tea. We wait with the kind of patience that feels like love, because it is. I am still a therapist. I still kneel and lift and count and praise and cajole and scold a little, when scolding is the way a person hears love best. Noel still makes chairs that welcome the weight of the honest and the tired. And he makes tables where meals will be eaten by people who have no idea a man like him stood under a window's light for hours and made sure it was smooth where they would put their elbows. We end our days with gratitude, with a hand on the back of the other's neck, with a look that holds the day steady, with a kiss that never forgets the first one in that bright new barn. If you ask me now what I remember first about falling in love with Noel, I will tell you about the way he watched me lift his grandfather's foot and made a space in his day for me to do my work. I will tell you about the way he listened to rain like it was news he could use. I will tell you about the words "I see you" in his careful script and how they landed on my life like gentle absolution. If you ask me what I remember last, I will tell you it is the way he lifted his hand on that night with ash in the air and gave me a small bird that said "stay," and how I stayed, and how staying became another word for home. We built a life in a place where not everything is explained and where not everything needs to be. On Sunday afternoons, when we sit on our porch and the buggies move like slow black commas along the road, we nod at the world and it nods back. I bring Noel his tea, he brings me my coffee. The shadows lengthen. The barn glows in that homecoming light that makes even new wood look old. We do not talk about how hard the path was. We don't have to. The porch holds those words for us, and the creek carries them, and the letters we no longer write are still there under the rock for anyone who knows how to read water. This is the kind of love that ties a quilt on a frame and runs its stitches close and careful. It's the kind that holds even when it's worn. It's the kind that understands that halfway is still a kind of together, and that sometimes you spend a whole day making a joint fit just right and call that the success it is. It's the kind that knows courage is a cup you pour slowly, so you don't spill what you intend to share. I am in love with an Amish man named Noel. He holds his hat the way men hold something worth respecting, and he holds my heart gently with the same hands he uses to build. I'm older than the first time I wanted something so much it scared me. I'm kinder to myself than I used to be. We are steady men, which is a better blessing than being only brave. We are learning how to be both. And if you ask me how we did it, how we are doing it still, I will say, with patience. With honest words said at the right time. with help from people who surprised us with their kindness, with a bird carved on the beam of a barn that's new and yet already smell of good work, with a creek that keeps our secrets and our promises, and with the faith, mine, his, ours, that loves a quiet life and is strong enough to bend and never break.